Welcome to Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science, the podcast where timeless traditions meet cutting-edge discovery. I'm Michelle Hammond, and together we'll explore how ancient practices that have stood the test of time combine with the wonders of modern medicine and evolving technologies. Each episode brings fresh insight into how this powerful meeting of past and present is reshaping health and healing, helping us better understand the body and mind connection, enhance well-being, and unlock human potential. In this episode, I'm joined by Dale Atkinson, whose journey through stage 4 cancer has redefined what it means to live with courage and determination. Through relentless inquiry, deep conversations with oncology specialists and experts, and a commitment to uncovering every possible angle of treatment, Dale has taken himself, with the aid of his trusted tribe, to the point of no evidence of disease. Beyond his own path, he's dedicated to sharing knowledge and igniting hope for others who've been told there is nothing more that can be done. This is a conversation about resilience, curiosity, and the power of one person's drive to create light in the darkest of circumstances. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dale Atkinson. Dale, it's an absolute joy to have you here and to get to learn a little bit more about your story and to talk about the power of integrative health, and particularly in cancer care.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for having me, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, well, it's an absolute joy. And the background's looking sunny and shiny, which is always kind of a nice sort of start to the morning, isn't it?
Unusual for sunny England, hey? Yes,
We're
nice
being
and sunny and warm.
We're being spoiled. Now, Dale, you had a stage 4 diagnosis a little while back. But before we delve into sort of that story, can you tell us a little bit more about what life was like before that diagnosis kicked in? What was kind of life like for you before the diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with career side. So I've spent the last sort of 15 plus years as a compliance consultant and compliance officers for various different finance firms. So life for me was digging through finances, looking for fraudsters, looking at money laundering, looking at, terrorists and bad actors within the sort of finance world. I've worked for everyone from Schroders to Deutsche Bank to HSBC and various others. Back about a year, well, 2.5 years ago now, I actually then decided to set up on my own. So having been made redundant, unfortunately, from a company I was working for, the market was relatively hard. So I went off and set up my own firm, essentially looking to consult with other firms in order to help them with money laundering and framework issues, etc., and to build out systems as well. I ended up at the point where I was due to actually take over a team investigating a very well-known president in a foreign jurisdiction, looking at multiple staff and all sorts. I was then due to take over a multi-million-pound contract with a retail bank, which was actually due to be signed a couple of days after my diagnosis, which unfortunately had to drop. So life was really great, to be honest with you. Yeah. I was working a lot of hours, a lot of stress, unfortunately, but nothing in life happens without a bit of stress and a bit of hard work. So for me, life was fantastic. We had a Great Dane puppy, 2 toddlers, beautiful house, typically what everyone sort of strives for in life. And then all of this happened.
Yeah, incredible. And so tell me about the lead up to that, the kind of symptoms, the things that drove you to kind of go forward to sort of see a doctor or get that sort of diagnosis in the first place.
Yeah, so mine's a bit of a different one to a lot of people. So back in about 2018, pre-COVID era, pre all of this, I started to get a lot of heartburn. I'd recently moved to London. I was working in a city, with that comes a lot of socializing, a lot of going out, a lot of drinking, a lot of trying to get your face in front of people, etc. And for me, at that point in time, I just thought it was my lifestyle. I thought it was, I was going out drinking twice a week, 3 times a week, some weeks. I wasn't eating the healthiest. I wasn't going to the gym very much at that point. And for me, I thought it was the lifestyle kicking in, and I had lots of heartburn, lots of gastric issues, lots of stomach pain, etc., coming through. Started going to the doctor in about 2018, 2019, and they gave me the typical response of, let's just put you on some PPI, some protein pump inhibitors to lower your stomach acid. It's got to be stomach acid related, you know, here you go, on your way, sort of thing. I must have gone back 3, 4, 5+ times over the course of about a year and a half up until COVID hit, and was met with kind of this exactly the same response every single time. At most, I was actually given a blood test and a stool sample. And when that came back with nothing, I was essentially told, you're wasting our time. It's just stomach issues. Go away, sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
did. And COVID hit, and sort of a year or so of hiding away from the world. And in that, my partner and I got engaged. We got pregnant. We had lots of other things going on, which all took precedence over my health at that point in time because we weren't to know exactly what was going on. And I sort of pushed it to the background. I decided to ignore it, and I was popping antacids or heartburn tablets or whatever you want to call them, like they were candy. I was going through, 6, 8, 10 a day. And
Wow.
I just thought at that point, my doctors told me it's nothing. They've done some tests. It's obviously nothing. I'm just making a big deal out of something silly.
Yeah.
Um, and then gradually it started to progress. So with that, I started to get shooting pains up through my shoulders, into my neck. Nowadays, we liken it to an angina pain because we've realized that the tumor was actually pressing on a cluster of nerves, which is causing it. And it's the same cluster of nerves that are involved when you have angina or a heart attack. So I
Right.
was having that regularly, and it was so painful that I started going to a body dynamicist and chiropractor to try and fix it. And
Yeah.
even they got to the point where they couldn't quite work out what was going on, and they were suggesting I should go back to the doctor.
Mm.
So we then picked up and moved out of London after our first child was born, back in 2000 and what year are we now? 2022, I think it was. 21, 22, 22 was when we moved out to the countryside out near Reading. And I went to a new GP, and the new GP did exactly the same as the old GP. Said, okay, let's run some tests. Thankfully, he was a little bit more on the ball than the first set of GPs and didn't make me
Mm.
feel like I was wasting his time. But he ran some stool samples, ran some bloods, said, "Look, don't think there's anything wrong. But let's put you through for an endoscopy." So I had an upper endoscopy where they put a camera down your throat,
Yeah.
just to check, sort of thing. Sadly, it took them nearly 9 months from the point where he decided to escalate it for an endoscopy through to the actual diagnosis and the endoscopy itself. And in that time, it obviously got progressively worse. And I was at that point struggling to get down food. Around the time of my actual endoscopy, I was struggling to even swallow water. It was heavily painful. And after every single bite of food, after every single swallow of liquid, I would end up lying on the floor thinking it was literally stabbing me in the chest. It was so painful.
Wow.
I started to lose weight very rapidly as well. I started at about 120 kilos and dropped down to my lowest. I got about 68, but that was after a bit of cancer cachexia kicked in.
Wow.
Um, and there were various other little bits and pieces along the way that probably aren't fit for me to say on air,
Yeah.
but lots of other symptoms and little bits in the background. Finally, the GI consultant who picked up my case ready for my endoscopy, which was sort of a couple of weeks before the endoscopy, spotted all of these symptoms, put it all together, and sort of went, "This actually doesn't look right. There's something
Mm.
more serious going on here." And they actually suggested me in for a CT scan. So I had the CT scan on the Sunday, and then went in for the endoscopy on the Tuesday.
Okay.
And just to add a little bit more fun to that, so my other half had actually been, so she had a funny turn in the summer that year as well,
Mm.
last year, not that year, last year. She had a funny turn in the summer. We actually thought it might have been a heart attack at the time. She was getting shooting pains. She was struggling to breathe at points. So we rang up 111. They sent around an ambulance, and they ended up taking her in for some more checks.
Mm.
Um, with that, they ended up doing an X-ray on her chest, and just completely by chance, they actually found a small cell lung cancer in her upper right lobe of her lung. Um,
Wow.
so she was in at the end of September, early October, actually, 3rd of October. She went in and had a lobectomy, so the entire upper right lobe of her lung removed.
Okay.
Um, 2 weeks later, there was then me on my second little boy's birthday. It was his first birthday. I went in for my endoscopy, and they put the camera down, and they found straight away a huge lump in my esophagus. Um, Unfortunately, because Anna had been in for her operation, I was not actually able to have the anesthetic. I wasn't able to be put under at all because I had to drive myself there and back because Anna obviously couldn't drive at that point.
Yeah.
So without any local numbing or anything, just the banana spray they give you, and people who've had an endoscopy probably know that one well.
Mm.
Tastes like rancid bananas. It's delightful stuff. It was just a numbing spray I had, and they put the camera down, and it was a huge calcified, so rocky looking lump right there in my esophagus. It's one of those where I saw it on the screen in front of me. I could hear the doctors and nurses in front of me talking about it. They were struggling to actually get the camera down past it. I don't think they even managed in the end. And they
Yeah.
ended up taking a biopsy then and there. And it's one of those where the doctor giving me the endoscopy turned around at the end of the endoscopy and said, look, it's not normally my job to do this. I'm really sorry to have to do it, but it is cancer.
Yeah.
So I was left then sat on my own in a hospital, having just been told I had cancer and having been told, excuse me, already at that point that it looked quite nasty and aggressive.
Mm.
Um, Not having anyone to talk to, not having anything really to hold on to, and not even having an appointment with an oncologist or anything in the diary to know what was going on. So it was a fun day, that one. And then I had to go
Really
home.
scary, isn't it?
It is extremely so, especially when it's given to you in such a way that it isn't kind of expected.
Yeah.
Um, at that point, I'd still been told by the GI consultant that it looked like it was a virus, or it was a stomach ulcer, or that I had leaky gut syndrome, or maybe even Crohn's disease. They thought it was one of these sort of things that was, excuse me, solvable, potentially curable, and that could at least be managed longer term.
Yeah.
At no point had they discussed cancer with me in any way, shape, or form. There was no indication that it might be cancer. I'd actually been categorically told it won't be cancer. And I'd also been told it definitely couldn't be a GI cancer because I was too young. I was only 35 at the time. And they told me essentially, don't worry, hold off. We'll do a test. It'll be absolutely fine. It's probably something we can solve with antibiotics, but just in case. So I was not prepared in any way, shape, or form at that point.
Yeah. And that's I mean, it's incredibly difficult to hear the diagnosis of cancer anyway. But to hear it, as you say, under those circumstances, having been told categorically, you're too young, it's not possible, it's not likely, it won't be, it'll be all these other things, but how do you move forward from that? How do you pick yourself up and kind of take another step from a narrative like that? Because when you were then diagnosed, when you were then told it was sort of cancer, you were also told, as you said, it was very aggressive, potentially incurable. You got to a stage 4 diagnosis. How do you process that, Dale?
So at that point, I didn't, excuse me. At that point, I didn't know it was a stage 4 diagnosis, and I didn't know it was inoperable and curable and all these other things they pegged me with since. At that point, I just knew it looked very aggressive and that it looked like quite a large, nasty tumor,
Yeah.
according to the doctor. So I was left with everything swimming around in my head. And I came home to my youngest little boy's first birthday. I came home to a partner who only a week and a half, 2 weeks beforehand had been through a lung resection. So she'd had
Yeah.
the whole upper lobe of her lung removed. Excuse me, 1 second. Apologies, something got into my chest.
Yeah, no worries.
uh, Came home to basically help my partner and try to get past it all and to show my little boy appreciation on his birthday. And
Yeah.
it was a really difficult day, that one. Thankfully, at the time, we had my in-laws over so my in-laws live in Texas. They're Mexican by background, but they live in Texas, and they'd flown over to help us during Anna's operation.
Yeah.
They were here at the time, and my dad had also stopped through on the way back from a meeting in London. So we had a house full of people, and there was me with this huge news that, to be honest with you, I didn't want to give anybody. I felt completely destroyed and battered by it. I was overwhelmed because, well, my partner's going through a lot at that point in time, and I'm trying to be strong for her. I'm trying
Yeah.
to be there for my kids. I'm also about to try and take on a multi-million-pound contract with this retail bank. I was under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress at that point. And to be honest with you, I broke. I mentally disappeared into myself. I didn't know what to do. I was scared for my life. I was scared for my family. I was scared for everything. And I retreated into myself completely. It wasn't then until, so my meeting with the oncologist, they had to wait for the MDT, so the multidisciplinary team meeting, in order to discuss my case and see what the next steps were. And at that point, that's where they kind of diagnose you as what staging, and they discuss it between the various different teams of surgery and oncology and everybody else involved. So I had to wait for an MDT meeting, which was a week and a half later. That happened on the Thursday. I was then on the Sunday, unfortunately, my mother died, and we found out the following day on the Monday morning on my eldest little boy's third birthday. I had the phone call that morning to say, unfortunately, my mother had passed. She sadly had been suffering with an autoimmune disease for quite some time, but we hadn't expected her to go anywhere near this quickly. She ran out of breath walking up the stairs, unfortunately, and collapsed and died due to the, I think it's called a pleural effusion in her lung, something along those lines. So then I had to deal with the grief of my mother's death. And then it was the next day I had my oncology meeting. So I went from my partner having had a lung cancer operation, my youngest little boy's first birthday, my mother then dying, my eldest little boy's third birthday, and then the next day I had to walk in and see an oncologist. In fact, sorry, apologies, it wasn't an oncologist, it was the oncological surgeon I went in to see that time, a gentleman called Mr. Booth. Turned up to that meeting, walked in, completely in shock still, everything going through my mind, kind of half expecting it to be nothing, but at the same time scared it was going to be something really big. And I think I was in there for less than 3 minutes. So they ushered me and my partner in, we sat down, he shook my hand, he said, I'm just going to come out with it. It's stage 4, it's inoperable, it's incurable. All we can offer you is palliative chemotherapy. We will run some tests to see if immunotherapy is available for you as well. But I'm afraid that's all we can do. With that, the nurse who was in there as well, handed across a book, and I think it's called Mummy Goes to Hospital. It'll become clear why I'm mentioning this in a second. So he then shook my hand and sent me out. We were left with being told it was stage 4, being told it was incurable, inoperable. At that point, we didn't have a prognosis, but we were told that it didn't look good, and that the average survival rates for esophageal adenocarcinoma, which is what I was diagnosed with, were not great. We went home very much with the feeling, and having not far off been told, get your things in order. This is kind of the end of the line for you. There isn't much we can do. We can try and throw some chemo at it. At that point, I think they were considering giving me doxybilirubin, also known as the Red Devil. So we went home and researched it, and also realized that it was not a particularly, it's not synonymous with a good level of quality of life. And of course, we also went home and Googled survival rates for adenocarcinomas or esophageal adenocarcinomas, and realized that the average survival rate is only around 8 months, between 8 and 9 months for stage 4. So at that point, I then sort of made the decision, and it was at that point very much an emphatic categorical decision, that I was going to refuse chemotherapy, that I wouldn't go through the same sort of treatment that sort of my mother and various other people with cancer we'd seen had gone through. I wouldn't destroy my quality of life just in order to have more quantity of life. We realized the Red Devil would essentially, if I only had, at that point we didn't know how long, but we sort of assumed 9 months to a year, because I was younger than most people with this cancer. If I was to only have a year, then I wanted to spend that year living and spending it with my children and making memories and actually being able to be there for them. Whereas if I'd chosen at that exact point the chemo route, it would have put me in a position where I would have been bedbound for 6 odd months. I would have felt like absolute death. I would have lost all of my hair. I would have lost even more weight than I ended up losing. And it would have put me into a really horrible position where, despite wanting to and needing to spend that time with my family, I would have not been physically or mentally capable of doing so. So that, for me, was sort of the turning point in my journey, was the realization that I wasn't actually able to listen to the doctors very well, because what they were suggesting would take away any chance of me having time with my family, my children. And by the time I'd come out of that chemotherapy, yes, it might have given me an extra 3 to 6 months, but it would have put me in such a position where that 3 to 6 months would have been in agony and destroyed
Yeah.
mentally and physically, and therefore I wouldn't have been able to spend the quality of time that I needed to with my family.
Yeah.
So that turning point then gave me the justification to start looking at alternatives,
Yeah.
and to start looking at other ways to essentially try and increase my quality of life at that point rather than my quantity of life. We weren't looking for a cure. We weren't looking for a magic bullet. We weren't looking for any of these things.
Yeah.
We were simply looking for ways for me to feel as okay as I could for as long as I could and to hold back any symptoms I was having. Um, so then I started following an integrative and sort of alternative, depending on how you like to call it, but I prefer complementary
Yeah.
route.
Me too.
With that, I'm going to change the order of things chronologically slightly because I think the way I did things was follow lots of rabbit holes, and I started reading sort of obsessively. I went through somewhere around 6,500 research papers and articles in the space of a few months.
Yeah.
Thankfully for me, my partner was feeling slightly better by then, and we'd had family in and out. My partner was able to give me the time and realized who I am as a human being, having known me for very many years now. She then gave me the space to spend between 14 and 16 hours a day reading. And
Wow.
I went through everything from Jane McClellan's book, took me less than a day to read.
Yeah.
I read, Nasha Winter's Metabolic Terrain Health book. I
Yeah.
read Radical Remission by Kelly Turner. I read all of these books.
Mm.
I read 30 odd books in the space of, I think it was 12 days.
Wow.
Um, and then from that, I started to realize that actually there was potentially more than was understood in the current sort of
Yeah.
standard of care, as it's called. And there was a lot more available to me than I had initially thought there was.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully for me, my background as a compliance officer, I was actually very lucky to have all of the exact skills I needed to be able to process this information as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
my job was based heavily in picking up large data sets, looking at really complex financial systems. We designed ways for people to prevent money laundering. We did lots of things on those sorts of sides. Lots of these AI systems, lots of screening and background systems that you hear about in banks. The ones where you have to provide your ID, etc., for them to check who you are. I spent many years sort of designing and implementing those. And the skill set of doing that was heavily based in data analysis. It was
Yeah.
heavily based in understanding complex theories and complex processes.
Mm.
And it was also heavily based in extracting data from things that aren't necessarily written in a way that makes logical sense to the average person. So,
Yeah.
reading a lot of legal documents, a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, understanding what the theme and the actual principle of those is, as opposed to just reading the words.
Yeah.
So for me, I was able to use those skills to then digest this huge amount of information and
Yeah.
start to put together my own picture.
Yeah.
As part of that, I came across integrative health, and I began looking at and interviewing essentially different integrative oncologists across the UK and abroad as well.
Mm.
I accidentally came across the Diary of a CEO episode with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, which had only been released a week or so beforehand.
Yeah.
Started to look at metabolic theory as part of that. I actually reached out and spoke to Dr. Seyfried, who lovely human being, by the way, really great guy.
Yeah.
He then put me onto a researcher based in the University of Westminster in London called Dr. Isabella Cooper. She was my first sort of port of call in terms of the first person I decided to invest my time with.
Yeah.
She, by the way, is a fantastic, brilliant metabolic and mitochondrial theorist, I suppose is probably the best way to put it, researcher. She does a huge amount in metabolic health. She looks a lot at brain cancers, a lot at metabolic theory and the Warburg effect and how that then has an impact on cancer. And she then provides a lot of research into that out of the university she works for. Um, she then sort of suggested I have a look at integrative health more generally. I spoke to, I think, 30 odd integrative oncologists in the space of a week and a half.
Yeah.
Um, Spoke to a guy called Dr. Andy Geyer, who was based out of the Cromwell Hospital in London. And as part of that conversation, he then indicated that next generation sequencing might be available. And I then spent a couple of days looking into that and eventually selecting a next generation sequencing company. So thank you, Dr. Geyer. That was really appreciated. And he also put me on to a gent called Dr. Harry Cohen. Harry has ended up becoming my integrative oncologist. And to be honest with you, he is the brightest human being I think I've ever met.
Right.
his understanding of oncology and how these things are stitched together and metabolic theory, it is bar none the best I have come across on this journey. He is honestly phenomenal. And I spoke to a lot of oncologists, and I pushed the little bit of knowledge I had just from my reading and asked them questions. And he was the first one who was able to very simply and very understandably break those down into a digestible, understandable format that made sense for, first of all, the knowledge that I had, and second of all, made sense overall for the grander picture I was eventually building.
Yeah.
To then take a sort of sidestep from there, as part of that, I also then came across Jane McClelland. And I'd also began reaching out to people in the naturopathy world who were looking at natural ways to heal, natural ways to deal with everything from inflammation through to all sorts. And I realized that in order to help myself on this journey, I needed to not just look at the off-label and integrative practices. I also needed to look at the whole self holistic healing. I needed to work out where my body was, how my body was really feeling, and to try and address any, first of all, deficiencies. So looking at vitamin D deficiencies, looking at the levels of various different sort of compounds, etc., in my body, and also then looking at things like the methylation process within my body, looking at the actual processes that underlie the specific factors that can go into cancer. So methylation can have downwards effects into the production of things like glutathione or NAC, and then into glutathione through the liver. And if that detox pathway isn't necessarily working very well, or it's clogged up for whatever reason, or you just don't methylate very well, then it can often mean that you don't produce enough antioxidants in order to combat any sort of free radicals or cancer cells within your body. So I went the naturopathy route in order to help my wider body to holistically heal in order to give me the best chance for the complementary therapies that I was doing and the integrative health therapies I was doing to actually work their magic, as it were. Not that they are magic, but to work the processes that they're due to attack.
Yeah.
As part of that, I came across obviously Jane McClelland. I actually spoke to Jane, and it turned out that we sort of knew each other, not directly, but because we'd both lived on Guernsey. Jane was born on Guernsey and grew up on Guernsey. I just moved back in 2017 from nearly 10 years stint living on the island. And I obviously met her brother, Martin Dorey, at some point. We knew a few mutual people. So we struck up a bit of a friendship, and she began to help me sort of define some of the bits along my journey as well. I also came across a guy on the metabolic side called Martin Gillespie, he's a fantastic metabolic theorist. He helps a lot of people with metabolic therapy. He helps look at how to integrate keto diets, etc., for general health. After a long conversation with him, he then put me onto Amanda King, who is a naturopathic doctor. And Amanda, outside of Harry, I think is possibly the most brilliant general human being I have ever encountered. Her knowledge generally is wow. And her approach to life is just incredible. She is honestly one of the favorite human beings I've come across, not even just on this journey, I think ever. She is just brilliant. And she has helped me with everything from interpreting bloods. We do my bloods on a monthly basis. We look at the levels of everything from inflammation markers through to where my liver is, through to just generally how I'm doing. And she doesn't just help me to address the issues I'm having in terms of health. She has actually helped me to better understand other things that are involved in my general health that I'd never even thought to consider. So looking at stress, looking at everything from microplastics through to mold, through to all sorts of other bits and pieces. And she's helped me to piece together and to better understand all the research that I'd already done and how it all interacts. And Amanda has this amazing ability to stitch together really complex ideas in a way that others can understand, both simply and in the context of what they are looking at that point in time. And she is by far, I think, the best person I've ever come across in terms of breaking down those ideas and being able to make them digestible for the person in front of her and therefore actionable for them. And by bringing her into my health journey, we have, first of all, managed to put my body in the absolute best and most optimal state in order to deal with this. She's also helped me to integrate a lot of things that are, a lot of them are very fringe science. There is a lot of evidence, I say fringe science, but there is a lot of evidence for them, but in isolation and not in a wider protocol. And she's helped me to bring those in and to actually create a really highly personalized protocol out of it. And that, I think, is a large part of the reason why my body has been so receptive to, well, first of all, to the standard of care which I ended up taking. And we need to go back to that in a second in terms of I did end up taking chemotherapy in the end. But she's also put me in the best place to heal generally and to keep my body in the optimal state ongoing to ensure cancer doesn't come back.
Yeah. Which is incredible, and as you say, that personalised message is absolutely key, isn't it? And we were chatting before the interview started. I spoke to Amanda sort of recently, and she is phenomenal. Her knowledge is just absolutely incredible, and people will be able to listen to sort of her interview, and obviously listen to all of the testimonials and advocacy that she has for the support she's given to sort of many people, and flies the flag for metabolic nutritional health sort of beautifully.
Absolutely.
But that personalization is absolutely key. And I think, can we go back to that initial sort of diagnosis, that 3-minute conversation, which just breaks my heart to hear that such news, as a human being, let alone as a psychotherapist and TCM practitioner, but as a human being to kind of tell anyone that sort of news in a 3-minute consult is just heartbreaking and devastating enough, and understandably floor most people and have them just get to a point of acceptance and sort of, you can see so many people would just take that information and give up. And it's incredible to see the tenacity you have and the drive you have to have kind of gone, actually, no, that I've heard that, but I'm not listening to it. I need more than that. I need more quality of time. And as you say, that was your initial guiding principle, was just give me more quality time than sort of quantity of time. And I think that, those things, are absolutely intricate. But for those people that don't understand the kind of metabolic term, because obviously a lot of oncology is looking at kind of hallmarks and that cancer, these rogue cells that mutate and whatnot. In your research, Dale, this kind of whole metabolic approach, which is kind of now being talked about much more, and luckily the whole integrative method, as you said, the complementary of kind of some of the leading sort of modern medicine and integrative principles coming together rather than as an alternative. What's been your learning and understanding around that metabolic pathway, and why that was such an important route to navigate?
So at first, it was very much, it felt like a rabbit hole. It was one of these where I'd seen a few people online talking about it. I started looking into the Warburg effect quite early on, and looking at the potential glycolytic nature. So the potential the process whereby tumors, especially solid state tumors, tend to uptake glucose as part of their growth cycle, I think is probably the best way to put it. And I started to look into how I could then affect that cycle as part of my research. Sorry, my brain's gone completely blank for a second here. Give me 1 second. I'm just having one of those brain fart moments.
Oh,
just stopped.
It happens to me all the time.
It never used to happen to me until chemotherapy. Unfortunately, chemo has damaged my brain in quite a few ways. So my brain just stops sometimes, and it takes a second or so to reboot. So 1 sec.
No worries.
Okay, so restarting that whole thing. So as part of this, and as part of meeting people like Amanda, etc., and also way back when I first met Dr. Isabella Cooper as well, there was a lot of mention of the metabolic side of things. And in my research, I came across things like the Warburg effect. I came across the glycolytic and glutamine-based nature of cancers. So I looked at how cancers, and specifically solid state tumors, use glucose and blood sugar in order to essentially feed themselves, and how they use insulin to shut off the use of fat within the body, how they then use that in order to essentially spike their own growth hormones and to also produce more acid to protect themselves as well. So I started to initially look at ways where I could address that. So metabolic theory is sort of the main way to address that. So very early on, I went on to an extremely strict vegetarian keto diet. I also tried to twin in, by the way, I've always been vegetarian ever since I was a little kid. So
Yeah.
for me, vegetarian, it was too difficult and it was too likely to cause issues because my pancreas had stopped producing certain enzymes, etc., or didn't produce certain enzymes, etc., to break down meat products and certain proteins. So I stuck with the vegetarian side for the fear that trying to switch to being a carnivore or trying to eat meat again, unfortunately, would cause a bit of damage in my body that maybe then gave the cancer more room to breathe. So I
Yeah.
stayed on the vegetarian route purely for that reason. And with that, I also tried to cut the glutamine as well. So I think for the space of roughly a month, nearly, I ended up eating tahini, halloumi, cucumber, and avocado was pretty much my entire diet for nearly a month, in order to essentially cut out all of the things that my cancer would try to use to eat from, but
Yeah.
whilst also keeping enough protein and just about enough vitamins in me, in order to sustain myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was also very similar to sort of a fast mimicking diet at that point as well. I was only eating once or twice a day. So as part of this, I ended up losing a lot more weight, but c'est la vie, these things happen. It was in order to then try and rebuild afterwards.
Yeah.
During that process, I then started to come across things like fasting. So I went from that month, I think it was about 3 weeks actually, of eating just sort of cucumber and tahini, etc. And then I decided to start trying to fast. During this time, by the way, I also went off and did, and going back to the point about personalization, I also went off and did a next generation sequencing test, which is a full genomic set of testing looking at or taking the biopsy of my tumor from the NHS and doing
Yeah.
a liquid biopsy with blood. And they then took all of that data away and began to do, first of all, a chemosensitivity panel, second of all, mapping my entire genome. And then the company I used to do this, Astron Health, have also got a proprietary AI system they use behind that in order to map every known oncological paper and research study, grade them, and then run that against the output of your genetic setup and your
Beautiful.
genomic outputs in order to then look at the off-label and other complementary therapies and compounds, everything from curcumin, which is a compound in turmeric, to piperine, which is in black pepper, through to how different chemotherapies, immunotherapies, and off-label drugs and standard drugs and all these various things fit into a protocol for you and which ones cause more cell death, etc. So I did that on the side as well, the personalization piece. Um, and we also, as part of that, looked at the nature of my cancer.
Yeah.
My cancer was, as Dr. Thomas Seyfried well puts across, and as Isabella Cooper had already sort of mentioned to me, it was heavily glycolytic in nature. It
Okay.
also ran on cortisol, so the stress hormone, adrenaline, and glutamine.
Yeah.
So it kind of then gave me the confidence, that output of that test, to first of all continue with starving my cancer in the metabolic route.
Yeah.
And just to note on that side, not all cancers are the same. Every cancer uses different uptake pathways, uses different food sources. So if you're looking at something like a prostate cancer, which is one of the bigger ones in the UK, and I speak to a lot of prostate cancer people, the focus that I took and the metabolic route I took is not going to be as applicable because prostate cancers tend to be based on amino acids and they tend to have a high uptake of amino acids, which are heavily present in, eating lots of meat or eating lots of keto focused foods. Therefore, I wouldn't suggest that taking my route is the perfect one for everybody. But for me, having done that sort of personalized testing, I was then able to validate what I'd already been working on separately from that and continue down that metabolic route because the science then backed the route that I was taking and my ability to then focus on how to sort of kill my cancer, as it were.
Yeah.
So that then took me up to the point where I started fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I initially started off with 1 and 2 day. Well, I started off initially with intermittent fasting during the period where I was eating very little. I then moved to doing a 2 day, then a 3 day, then a 5 day, then a 7 day, and then a 10 day water fast.
Okay.
In the meantime, I'd gotten the full results back from my chemo sensitivity testing for Astron, and I went and had a conversation with my oncologist, and we realized that there is also another cancer drug that was available, or chemotherapy drug that was available to me specifically on a palliative route, which was called Capox. So that was oxaliplatin and capecitabine, which is an oral form of 5-FU. Not a particularly lovely mixture. It leaves you with lots of neuropathy and brain issues and all sorts of things afterwards, but it was far less damaging than the Red Devil that I'd been offered at the beginning. And
Yeah.
therefore, with the output of that testing and the testing also showing that the K-pox mixture was also probably one of the best for my body and my genetic makeup and to combat my specific cancer, it then gave me the confidence to start chemotherapy at that point. So I'd twinned in the metabolic piece, then brought in the fasting, then used the output of my next generation sequencing in order to push my oncologist into giving me a drug that actually worked better for me.
Oh, really?
And then at that point is where I decided that although I'd initially declined the chemotherapy, that actually it might be a good idea to go forward with it because I also, alongside the chemotherapy, the chemo sensitivity testing, also then had a set of off-label drugs and was working with Harry in order to define those drugs and to create a protocol with Harry, with Amanda, with Isabella Cooper. And I also had feed-ins from Jay McClelland, from quite a lot of other people within the cancer community as well, who are specialists in what they do. I had feed-ins from them and began to actually create my own protocol to protect myself from the chemotherapy, to increase its efficacy, and to try and find other ways to prime my body so that the, first of all, damaging effects were limited. Second of all, the efficacy was increased. I'm sorry, I think I'm repeating myself here, but my brain does that at this point because of the chemotherapy. In order to essentially kickstart my metabolism into as better state as possible, and to essentially ensure as much longer term survival and quality of life as possible, both through the chemotherapy and ongoing afterwards.
Yeah.
Thankfully, everything I'd done to prepare and everything I then put in started quite quickly. I think it took me around 6 weeks to a month to start feeling the true effects of it.
Okay.
And after sort of, let's call it 2 months, I think, with the off-label drugs that Harry had prescribed off the back, which we had refined and sort of picked out of the next generation sequencing, with the pieces that Amanda was fitting in, which in total I think I was taking from Amanda probably around 30 or 40 different supplements a day.
Yeah.
I then layered in my own pieces on top of that, and began to layer in lots of complementary therapies as well, which we'll go into in a second. At that point, I was probably taking 100 to 150 different pills every single day. I was also then spending between 6 and 8 hours in complementary therapies. The combination of that, after that 2 months, meant that my cancer started to very quickly feel better. I went from struggling to swallow, in pain, feeling like I had to lie on the floor and I was on everything from pregabalin, which is a nerve blocker, to oxycodone. I was on, I was popping paracetamol like they were sweeties as well. I was taking pretty much every form of pain medication that they could and would give me. It was that much pain that I was still feeling pain through that, significant amounts of pain through that, and ended up hospitalized for it a lot at that point as well. And it stopped 2 months later. It just sort of stopped. One day, I can't remember feeling it gradually stopping. Just one day I woke up and there was no more pain. And I started to be able to swallow. And I started to not feel like my entire chest was caving in every time I had something to eat or every time I swallowed something that was too hot, too cold, or anything. And it very quickly became clear that actually the output of all of this input was starting to accumulate and I was starting to see the health gains of it all.
Yeah. That's incredible,
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean, Amanda talks about, not treating the tumor, treating the terrain and kind of readying the body. And you mentioned that through, normalizing and stabilizing and bringing back to balance the whole body and also then increasing the efficiency and efficacy of the treatments you were sort of intaking. But to think, actually a really short space of time. I mean, most modern drugs take anything between 3 to 6 weeks to start to have an effect, and 6 to 12 weeks to start to normalize that effect. But of course, they can also then come with huge side effects. But to think in a relatively short space of time, you had gone from noticing such a disability in your symptoms to sort of just stopped. It must
yeah,
have given you such incredible hope to propel forward
absolutely.
and to kind of keep pursuing.
And I suppose, firstly, going to the antithesis of the hope. At some point during that, I sat down with my oncologist, and this was around the time they were talking about which chemotherapies, etc., and had a sort of in-depth, nearly 2 hour long discussion. One of the things they pointed out on the metabolic side was they actually encouraged me to eat a huge amount of sugar. They told me this was the best excuse to eat a tub of ice cream a day and to eat a bar of dairy milk a day, because they felt that I'd lost enough weight that I needed to put on weight before chemotherapy. And second of all, they'd given me a prognosis at that point. I had to push for the prognosis a little bit, I'll be honest, but they gave me an 11.5 month prognosis, and that would be without any treatment, because at that point I was looking to deny chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And they told me that the maximum prognosis they could give me was about 13.5 months. And that would be if both chemotherapy and immunotherapy were used. And they told me that was the average survival of people in similar positions to mine. And that they didn't expect, because of the progression of my cancer at that point, they didn't expect I would last much longer than that, at best. So it took a lot to then find the hope. It took a lot to throw myself completely into both the metabolic theory and to the complementary therapies. And it took a lot to try and push through that and continue going, especially with everything else that was happening in my life.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, at that point, there wasn't much hope. It didn't feel like much hope until that turning point of actually feeling that things were happening. I was going on pure stubbornness, pure pig-headedness, because, well, my background as a compliance officer lends itself to ignoring everybody and just continuing down the path that you think is right, because
Thank goodness.
you've done your research and you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And nobody else should be able to influence your journey. Everyone will always try, but nobody else should be able to influence your journey. If you have done the prep work yourself and you understand what you're doing, you shouldn't let anybody else sway you in any way, shape, or form, unless they are providing evidence that actually, not supports, because that isn't necessarily the right direction to go here, evidence that is firstly irrefutable and helps to build on what you are trying to achieve. And if they can do that, then by all means accept it. Sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. My brain completely skipped again. Going back to the whole idea and what we were talking about. So the hope wasn't really a factor at that point. It was stubbornness. It was probably a bit of stupidity and a bit of pig-headedness, I think, as my other half calls it, that I just decided I wouldn't accept it. I couldn't accept it. And that I loved my family and my little boys so much that I would try to find whatever way I could to even slightly increase my quality of life for them, so that I could spend the time with them and for them going forward. We ended up probably spending our entire life savings. We ended up throwing absolutely everything at this. We have gone to the point where we built a therapy center at the bottom of the garden. We have a hyperbaric chamber in the house. We have an infrared and red light sauna in the house. I have red light panels. I have pulsed EMF mats, which I use on a daily basis. We have an oxygen generation machine, or an oxygen compressor machine. We have, I take over 100 different supplements most days now. We have every off-label drug you can think of in this house. We have done absolutely everything and thrown absolutely everything at this to give me the best possible chance to try and survive this, essentially. And I think it was, for me, knowing that I had that support and that ability, and also being very thankful to have had life insurance that paid out a little bit at that point in time as well, in order to back me financially for this, that gave me that hope eventually, that let me continue pushing until I felt those changes and until I started to feel a little bit better.
Yeah. And, it's so inspirational, Dan. As you say, you've got this incredible skill set that just, fortunately sort of put you in a position where actually plowing through those thousands and thousands of, sort of research papers and medical jargon and stuff that would have, sort of sent most of us into a spin and been, sort of just incomprehensible. You had this skill set, you've had this drive, whether it's pig-headedness or, that sort of fight for survival, because, your family mattered and you wanted to be there and you wanted to do it. It's exhausting listening to what you've had to go through to fight to give yourself the chance of a quality of life.
And,
Yeah.
it's incredibly inspiring. And I know anybody watching this will, sort of be massively inspired by hearing your story and have hope for themselves if they're living with a diagnosis or new to this world of the things that they can do to empower themselves. And that personalization message being, absolutely sort of key in that. But it also, as I say, it sounds exhausting. It sounds exhausting that when you're facing such a prognosis, that instead of being lifted up by a medical profession, whether purely Western, integrative, whatever, and sort of supported and sort of, I kind of envisage, all these hands that should have been under you and going, just give in to us, let us take you forward and support you. But instead, no, you've had to go, no, my feet need to be on the floor and I'm loading myself with all these tools and all this knowledge, and I'm having to kind of load up my backpack and go forward into this kind of dense forest and try and navigate my way through this at a time where you need to be taking time to heal and restore and rebalance. And I mean, it's such a conflict, isn't it? And such a dichotomy to sort of be into. And thankfully, you're feeling the benefits and you're noticing the real rewards of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't imagine the depths you must have had to dig deep to.
Well, I mean, along those lines, so that long meeting I had with my oncologist where she told me my prognosis, within that, I had also began to mention alternative therapies, complementary therapies. I'd began to mention things like integrative health, and I'd started looking into the saunas and everything else. I sat down with my oncologist during that meeting and mentioned to her that I was looking at some of these complementary paths, and her automatic reaction was, do not do that. That is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do. You will kill yourself. You are, people who do that are a danger to themselves and all these kind of things. And I'll be honest, I walked away from that meeting quite scared of the things that I myself had already researched and already had faith in. She really put a spanner in the works for me at that point, and I had to spend the next day or two seriously stopping and thinking about what I was doing, and began to really second guess myself. So in terms of the fact that it is a dichotomy, yeah, absolutely. It is so difficult to maintain your composure when you have somebody who is, you know, in a white coat, as it were. If you take the Milgram experiment, you are used to obeying people who are experts in their field. And I was sat there in front of an oncologist, and having originally come into this with the mindset of doctors are right. My mother was a nurse. I have lots of friends who are doctors. And I was very much thinking, well, they are the experts. I will listen to and do exactly what they tell me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until things like that meeting or, the pushback meeting I'd had where I'd been told there's nothing we can do for you except a bit of chemotherapy. It wasn't until those specific points that I had felt that there was any ability for me to go off path, as it were, and to start doing things for myself. But having been faced with what they were telling me and having been told things were dangerous that for me felt evidence backed and that was enough sort of proof there that they worked. And by the way, I'm on one to always follow the science, to follow the evidence, to look at phase 2 and phase 3 trials. I don't necessarily think that everything that makes itself through to a phase 3 trial means that it's the most efficacious thing there. There is a lot to be said for the off-patent and off-label drugs, especially where they've run out of the patent itself and therefore don't really make anybody any money if they try and back a trial to them. So for me, I was looking at and weighing the dangers of those and weighing the potential efficacy of those against my oncologist, who should have been my expert, who should have been supporting me and should have been my guide on this journey, who was categorically telling me not to bother, that I would do damage to myself, that I would do all these things if I followed that route and didn't just eat lots of chocolate and take chemotherapy.
I mean, it's mind blowing, isn't it? I mean, I had an auntie that had breast cancer, and at the time she was putting something like 13 sugars in her tea. And I'd also said to her, be given any nutrition advice. And they were like, you're just like, no, just carry on doing what you're doing. And like, this whole conversation around, we have this message, particularly here in the UK, I'm sure you've seen this whole message about, some cancers can be caused by obesity and we're more prone to cancer if you've got diabetes. And so all of this messaging about actually what you eat matters, massively matters. It matters to your overall emotional and physical well-being. And yet suddenly you get cancer and the message is it doesn't matter anymore. Surely it matters even more now.
Oh,
Just,
hugely
I
so.
mean, not as an academic, but just from a common sense point of view, if it mattered to prevent me getting it or to minimize my risk of getting it, surely it matters even more if I'm diagnosed with any sort of dis-ease.
I mean, if you just look at the juxtaposition, or the juxtaposition is probably the best way to put it, of the fact that the NHS still see cancer as a genetic disease,
Yeah.
and yet one of their best ways to track and monitor cancer is a PET scan. And a PET scan involves basically sticking some radioactive sugar into your body so that they can track where the tumor is, because the tumor is glycolytic in nature. So they already use metabolic theory in order to map your cancer and already tell you that it is one of the best ways to identify and map your cancer. So why don't they then use that same theory that they're using to map and find and scan your cancer in terms of treating it? It
Yeah,
doesn't quite make sense.
that's
There's no logic to why they would use these as tools, but then deny their existence in terms of the therapies and the treatment they're trying to give you. And to me, that juxtaposition and that, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but can't find the word, but that sort of conflict between what they're doing and what they're saying, to
yeah.
me, was what also then gave me a little bit of confidence that I could follow the route I was after, and that my doctor wasn't necessarily the expert that she thought she was, or that I wanted her to be. So it gave me that little kick of confidence, seeing that they were using metabolic theory in ways that they didn't necessarily understand that they were using it, to then throw myself fully into that rabbit hole.
And it's the one size fits all mentality, isn't it? That we, as you've mentioned, there's 100 variations of sort of cancer, and sort of thousands when we look at the fact that it's actually, it's such a personalized sort of disease. It's our own, cells that sort of conflicted. And so from that perspective alone, you would think, yes, there's some mainstream, treatments and evidence that they might hang their hat on, but being open to support people's wider well-being to help them go through it. I mean, we know exercise, don't we? The power of exercise,
Yep.
exercising to maintain our risk of all sorts of diseases and sort of health conditions. But also we know that the more active people are through treatment, through chemotherapy, the more likely they are to, respond well to it, to improve quality of life. And so all of these kind of things, there's what I call kind of ancient wisdom, these basics around movement, around managing emotions and stress, about social connection, about financial security, all of these things help people, nutrition, help people just be well anyway. So, if
Absolutely.
they're unwell, those things need to be integrated. They need to be considered. We need to look at kind of where in the kind of wheel the imbalance is, and help, rebalance that and re-regulate that. And so I really struggle to understand the narrative around, it's not great, it's stage 4, nothing we can do, it's incurable, basically go get your house in order. Because even if that were the prognosis and they genuinely thought there was nothing else to do, the emotional support they could have gave, and that could have been really helpful to your quality of life, even with a really short prognosis,
Yep.
could have made the world of difference.
Absolutely. And for me, that's, I think, one of the things that I'm very thankful for in my past, is that I actually ended up sat on the board of a suicide prevention charity. It's a global network that oversees things like the Samaritans, etc., or sits over the top of the Samaritans, etc. And as part of that, during COVID, because I was one of the only non-psychologists on the board, I went and did a diploma in psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy.
Which is
And
incredible with everything else going on in your life.
well, at that point, it was during COVID. It was either sit in the garden drinking, or do something with my time.
Yeah.
So I decided to do something with my time. I also tried learning Spanish, but that wasn't successful at all. But I did get my diploma at least. And coming into this, it meant I was able to use a lot of those cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and a lot of the psychological techniques that I'd learned. And I was actually able to mentally put myself in a better position. And I really don't envy anybody else who isn't in that sort of position and gets this same sort of news, because a 3-minute conversation, and I don't think it was even 3 minutes, to be honest with you, where somebody sort of steps up and stands over you in a white coat and says, "That's it, the end is near for you, goodbye," sort of thing, shakes your hand and sends you off with no words of hope, no words of wisdom in any way, shape, or form, nothing to hold on to, and no way to first of all find yourself, and second of all to really understand what the implication of that is for you. is so heavy on the sort of psychological side that
Horrific.
and I think a lot of people sadly, excuse me, end up living to their prognosis or living to their diagnosis because they are put under that mental strain. They are put in that psychological position where, as per the Milgram experiment that happened after the Second World War with the Nazis, the proof that somebody in a white coat standing over you telling you to do something, the psychological effect of that is huge. Somebody that you discern to be an expert telling you that this is the way it is and this is what you must do. It's so hard to fight against, and it's so hard to see through that a lot of people end up dying to their exact timeline when they don't need to in any way, shape, or form. They can absolutely push further and do something else. There is absolutely no way they are, okay, I can't say they're not incurable, but there is no way that there is nothing more we can do. There is always more they can do. There is always more that can be thrown at this. There is always something to add to it, something to change, something to look at, something to research, something to help to benefit the body in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
It's just, it is not currently supported by the NHS. And that's, I think, the big message I need to get across to people, and I'm trying to through my advocacy work, is that no one doctor and no one person has all the answers. I've
Absolutely.
mentioned just how brilliant Amanda King was and how brilliant Dr. Curran was and how amazing Isabella Cooper is and Jane McClelland, but no one single one of those has all the answers. And
or believes they do. That's the
no,
difference as well, isn't it? Is actually a lot of those people are the people that would encourage you to go and speak to other people and to pick up the baton where they can't. And that's again the part with some oncologists is the frustration that they're so shut off to anything else that kind of may give the person hope and support, not in even treating the cancer sometimes, but in just treating themselves to cope better with their diagnosis or the treatment that's coming.
absolutely. And unfortunately, I think, and I don't mean this in a horrible way, but unfortunately, I think the NHS trains people in a certain way where they are only trained and taught to look at a certain pathway, and anything outside of that, they just categorically denounce as dangerous. I think one of the prime examples of this is, and I hate to bring her up, but it's Liz O'Riordan. If you look at some of the things that Liz O'Riordan puts out, she is a brilliant oncologist. Don't get me wrong. I don't have any issue with her background, her knowledge, etc. But when she's online categorically calling people out for taking metformin or taking ivermectin and taking things that are actually now proven to help in an oncological setting, and that people, especially in a position like mine where you're told there is no hope and no way to get through this, people are of course going to want to experiment with, denouncing them straight out as, conspiracy theorists and telling them that they're dangerous is not the way that oncologists should approach this sort of thing. The better approach, and the approach that thankfully my oncologist has started to give into herself, having seen the gains that I've made, is to first of all stop and be curious. Second of all, it's to not denounce something just because there isn't necessarily a phase 3 trial. And a lot of the stuff I've looked at and used myself is at least phase 2 trialed. It just hasn't actually had the financial backing because a lot of it's off patent, meaning that pharmaceutical companies can't actually earn any money out of it because they don't own the patent for it. So things like metformin, which have been around for many, 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 many years and used in lots of different settings, it doesn't have a phase 3 trial directly in an oncological setting, and therefore oncologists aren't allowed to suggest it under the NICE guidelines, etc. And as part of the UK medical regulations, they aren't allowed to suggest it, and they aren't allowed to, technically experiment with people. So for people to do that for themselves takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of forethought and a lot of hope to try and do these things to yourself. And an oncologist in a white coat sitting over you and telling you this is dangerous without giving you scientific backing, without being able to prove why, without being able to actually tell you why they're calling it dangerous, is in itself extremely dangerous. And I think a lot of these people a lot of the doctors who call misinformation need to understand this, that unfortunately they can shout misinformation all they like, but in reality, that'll actually push more people down these rabbit holes unless they provide the proof that goes with it. And
I think that's a really important point, Dale. Sorry to interrupt you there. That's a really important point. I saw a note from a doctor recently, talking about the amount of misinformation and the amount of the kind of change in consideration for doctors and sort of people questioning more, their training, their academic, whatever. And, yes, I know, social media is a minefield of misinformation and sort of rabbit holes, and particularly, some through goodwill and others deliberate and malicious. But, I do think, unless, science is an area of grey. I mean, COVID taught everyone that, isn't it? It's a massive area of grey, and it needs curiosity. It needs an open mind for the very nature of what science is and stands for. And so anybody in the field of health or medicine should have an open and curious mind and not believe that what they currently know is the truth. We've got to be open to being proved wrong all the time and looking for evidence.
Just to pick up on exactly that point, there is no irrefutable proof in terms of the cause of cancer. At this moment in time, there is no cause. There is no defined actual singular cause for cancer. Cancer is such a massive spectrum of things that there is no one theory that explains it. It's not genetic specifically in nature, although genetics can come into it. It's not definitely metabolic in nature, although metabolism does come into it. It's not definitely caused by outside pollutants, mycotoxins, molds, etc. in your body. It is a huge combination of different things, and everybody's cancer, everybody's journey is completely personal to them, and everybody's genetics are extremely personal and highly specific to them. So there is no way that people like the NHS, or I'll say institutions like the NHS, can categorize this into standard of care pathways, because the difference between my journey and somebody else with exactly the same cancer, and I mean, I can dip into one of these instances. I actually met somebody very early on in my journey called Roger Snelling, who is a really genuinely amazing guy who lived down in Cornwall. He had exactly the same cancer as me. He was in a slightly better position than me back when I first started talking to his wife, Jill, who I'm still in contact with now. He had a smaller tumor. He had less metastases. He had less ongoing issues at that point in time. He had a much better prognosis than I did. He had a much better general health than I did at that point. And sadly, he actually died. He followed a lot of the integrative health stuff. He followed a lot of the metabolic health stuff. He followed a lot of exactly the same things that I did. But his genetic makeup, despite having exactly the same cancer, was different enough to mine that the path he took didn't work. And he was on everything from, daily THC and CBD. He was using red light therapy. He was on various different off-label drugs. He was using ivermectin. He was using all these things exactly the same as I am, although I do a fair few different. But he was using a lot of the same things and had a completely different outcome to it. And that, to me, is the whole point of part of my advocacy, and part of what I need people to understand is that you can't be pigeonholed. There is no singular truth to cancer. It is all a personal journey. And if ivermectin works for you, fantastic. If taking horse tranquilizers works for you, great. I'm not going to tell you to do them. I'm not here to tell you which path to take. And no doctor should do the same either. What they should do is keep a curious, open mind. They should look at the real science behind it. They should work out, if you want to try this, that is okay. But first of all, we need to note it on the system. We need to look at the interactions. We need to make sure that you are doing it in the safest possible route, and not just outright to your face call you dangerous unless there is a reason for it. And I'm all for, if there is, taking horse drugs, taking fenbendazole and ivermectin in canine and equine pastes is not a route to go down. They contain heavy metals. They contain lots of things that can cause you huge amounts of damage. And I completely agree that those are dangerous. There is no reason to be taking them. There is no reason that people should be resorting to that when there are human grade versions around that have been tested for heavy metals and all these other things that are in these pastes. Therefore, I understand why some of these people go this route and why some of people try to pigeonhole cancer patients and just tell you it's dangerous. But they need to actually start taking in the holistic approach to cancer, and not just the singular minded, do this because I say so, because I've been taught this. They need to start opening up to the fact that there is a huge world of other theories, of other drugs, of other mechanisms, of other processes and other treatments that can be used as part of the general cancer journey. And with that, I mean,
it's a complementary form of medicine that's highly personalized and tuned to the individual presenting.
Absolutely. And I think part of that is, and I'm very thankful to see some of this in the 10-year NHS plan, It's making sure that you have an understanding of where you are genetically. You have enough of an understanding of the science that your tumor has behind it. So whether it's glycolytic, whether it's amino acid based, whether it uses glutamine, whether it uses cortisol, whether it uses adrenaline, you need to understand and have enough knowledge of your own situation, your own health, and your own cancer, and what drives it, in order to be able to then self-advocate and sit there and understand that your doctor doesn't necessarily understand the same thing you do. They look at things through a very one-colored, monotone lens that they are given. It's how they're taught. They don't necessarily use what is the modern science.
Which is incredible, isn't it? Because actually, you know, modern medicine is supposed to be built on modern science, and you know, you and I are both the same in our love for evidence-based, you know, sort of treatment protocols and thinking. And yet here we are with things like next-gen sequencing and the ability to kind of profile molecules and sort of get a real snapshot of your terrain in this moment, and not just for treatment planning, but to monitor the effectiveness and efficiency of that in 6 weeks time, in 12 weeks time, in 6 months time, and to be adapting and changing as the needs sort of go on. And that technology is available. That, you know, that's the exciting part of kind of, you know, modern medicine and technology progressing at the pace it is. But yet it's nowhere near available to, well, it's not available to anybody within the NHS, and it's not available to most people from a financial point of view. It's prohibitive for most people. And so that massively changes the dynamics, doesn't it, of kind of quality of care and options for anyone diagnosed with cancer.
Absolutely. And that's, I suppose, is my point in terms of the NHS's 10-year plan, is they are actually looking to bring in next generation sequencing in order to help with some of these journeys. But I suppose another note to note on that is, weirdly, the NHS, despite the fact that it's having cost issues, etc., if it was to bring in some of these things, so if we look at chemosensitivity testing, chemotherapy is rejected by not the majority, it is the minority of people, but it is a large percentage, a very large percentage, especially at stage 4 and above. I say and above, stage 4 terminal cancers, or stage 3B and above terminal cancers. Chemo is rejected in a lot of cases, a lot more than people would like to think. And if the NHS was to stop and bring in something as simple as chemosensitivity testing, which can be done on bulk for as cheap as sort of £100 to £150 per person, compared to the price of the chemo drugs that don't work, if they were able to assess and to increase the efficacy by using off-label drugs, so we'll go into that in a minute, but if they were able to just assess whether chemo would work in that specific genetic instance, the NHS could save itself such a monumental amount of money on a yearly basis. Most rounds of chemo cost somewhere between, I think it was £2,000 and £26,000, depending on exactly the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Immunotherapy costs sort of similar. I think it's between 10 and 15,000, very roughly. And for me, I mean, I had 6 rounds of a chemotherapy, which it's not a cheap one, K-Box. It's probably cost them about £12,000 per round. So that's what, £72,000, I think. Yeah, £72,000. That's a lot of money. And if that had been rejected by my body and hadn't worked because my genetic setup wasn't available to it, they could have saved that with £100 test. And they could have given me a completely different chemotherapy, as they were originally trying to do with the doxycycline. They could have given me a completely different chemotherapy, which was better suited to my genetics, better suited to my cancer, more personalized to me, and available and proof tested on the NHS already, and it signed off by the medical regulator in the UK, which is why it's been used for different cancers in different scenarios. But they could have done all of that for a £100 test and taken away that percentage of people who do reject the chemotherapy. That could it could save massive amounts of costs. It could save a huge amount of issues. It could, you know, give way better outcomes and therefore way less burden on the NHS over the longer term as well. So for me, it's a nonsensical setup, the NHS now. I think, unfortunately, it is still a very reminiscent system of how it was born out of the Second World War. And it doesn't adapt to emerging science. It doesn't adapt to things that aren't financially backed through pharmaceutical companies. So it needs phase 3 trials in order to prove things. And it unfortunately doesn't keep up with the latest theories and the latest science, because having to retrain every oncologist in the UK first of all, would be too cost prohibitive. And second of all, to update systems and update technologies that they use and treatments that they use would also cost too much for the NHS at this moment in time. So it is understandable why they go the non-personalised route, but it is also hopeful, looking at the 10-year plan, that they are looking to try and adapt to bring some of this in. So my hope over the longer term is that through this and through things like my petition and through things like Jane is going on the record and saying a lot of similar things as well, and the Yes to Life charity too, through all these various mechanisms, my hope is that there is enough political pressure, that there is enough want within both society and the NHS, and there is becoming enough understanding of integrative health in general, that these changes will take place and happen over the course of that 10-year plan for the NHS, and will put a lot of this into sort of the forefront and start to adapt and change the way that we treat cancer in general, so that more people can get outcomes like mine.
Yeah. And talking about outcomes like yours, Dale, I remember reading, and actually it was the sort of week after that I had a chat with Amanda, and we were both sort of talking about your brilliant post where you talked about the fact that you had obviously, you know, realised that there's no tumour, there's no secondaries, there's no abnormalities. I know at the moment you're waiting for a scan to look at sort of a more formal diagnosis of no evidence of disease. But tell us about that, because actually in a relatively short space of time, I know you have given so much energy and sort of consideration to it, and have been so proactive in your own health, and been the biggest advocate you could possibly have been. Tell us about that, because of course anxiety and sort of the worries of going for these sort of follow-up tests when treatment, any type of treatment is undertaken, is such a burden, and I support many people in that kind of approach to those sort of scans. I mean, the anxiety leading up to that sort of scan must have been quite hefty, but to kind of go in and get results like that must be pretty incredible. And I remember you talking about your choice of beer at the time, and me just thinking, gosh, I think I even wrote to you, you know, that beer must have been the best you've ever drank. I mean, it was just such a brilliant post to read.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, first of all, just to clarify, in terms of the scan I'm waiting for, so I have actually asked for that to be pushed back, and that's now going to be set in October time. I haven't got an exact date for it yet. I'm still waiting for that to be confirmed. But they are looking at a PET scan, so using the same sugar syrup we discussed earlier, to essentially look at whether there is any metabolic activity in my tumour still. And if there is, unfortunately, I won't be cured, as it were. If there isn't, it means that I have managed to go within a year. So I got diagnosed in October last year, started my therapies and everything else in probably December time, started off-label drugs in December as well. I managed to go in that to October, when my scan will be, to getting no evidence of disease. For cancer that I was told would be completely incurable, inoperable, etc., they did not think this was in any way possible. My oncologist has now significantly changed her approach from calling me a danger to myself and telling me that I will end up killing myself through the off-label drugs I'm using, with me still trying to be open with her and telling her everything, because I thought it was important at that point in time to make sure there weren't interactions. She's gone from that stance to now actually asking me occasionally for bits and pieces that I have used and the science that I have used, because I'm hopeful that she's actually reading through it.
Yeah.
But going back to your question in terms of how that scan felt, so I'd had a CT scan not too long before, in May, I think it was. I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, but it was May time.
Yeah.
My oncologist hadn't actually told me the proper results of that. I had managed through a subject access request to get hold of a copy of my scans and look for myself, and found that at that point my metastases had gone. So there was no more lymph node involvement. In one of the reports, it had stated that there was something on the neck of my pancreas, and that there was also a 3.6 centimeter secondary on my aorta. Those had all disappeared in the scans. And my oncologist at that point in time had only told me that the treatment had been effective and that there was a response to the treatment, and that we would have to wait and see down the line as to what that really meant. But for the moment, there wasn't really anything to note, and we just continue as we are. So I was left at that point in time not feeling all that hopeful after the conversation with my oncologist, and also feeling like she had kind of indicated, you know, cancers can come back. They can adapt to some of these things. You know, they can adapt to chemotherapy. They can adapt to immunotherapy. there is a potential that it could actually progress and get worse before your next scan. So don't stay too hopeful, you know. She hadn't left me feeling very good.
Mm.
I then went into my next scan. So I went and took the family away on holiday. We went off to Gran Canaria for a couple of weeks to try and reset because we'd had so much going on at that point, and it was, you know, I was meant to have finished chemo then as well. Sadly, I didn't quite because of various issues with neutropenia and all these other things. But it was also meant to be a break after finishing chemo and a celebration of finishing chemo. Came back, went into my last round. Then at the end of my last round, so July time, I had, or end of June actually, I think it was, I had another scan. And the output of that, which I didn't find out for a few weeks at that point, and the anxiety of waiting for the results more than waiting for the scan were huge. And then walking into that meeting and my oncologist turning around to me and saying, basically everything has disappeared. She said, I can't tell you have no cancer, but you have had, you know, I think they call it is it an outlier response, like a 1 in a million kind of chance of response. Your response has been that. And essentially, there is no sign of cancer. There is no tumor left. There is no metastases left. The only thing I had was some thickening of the distal esophageal wall, which tends to be a sign of inflammation caused by the cancer itself, and can hopefully be dealt with over the longer term. The only reason they can't give me a no evidence of disease at that point is because the cancer wasn't detectable on the CT scan, meaning that there is no physical size to it.
Yeah.
And I should also note at this point that that meeting was originally set up to potentially discuss surgery.
Yeah.
So because my metastases had disappeared, although they hadn't told me, they were then looking at whether they could actually surgically remove my tumor and give me what's called an esophagectomy. If anyone listening to this knows anything about an esophagectomy, it's one of the nastiest sort of surgeries and operations you can have in the cancer world, except when you have multiple surgeries and all these kind of things. But essentially, they take your stomach, most of your stomach out. They take out the esophageal junction where the tumor is completely, and they stitch up part of your intestine above your diaphragm to the bottom of your esophagus. And it leads you to, first of all, not being able to eat solid food for a very long time. It doesn't come with a great prognosis, just the surgery. So those who've had the surgery don't tend to live a great amount of time compared to people who haven't had the surgery. It comes with various different issues and would mean that my entire life would change. And it was not something I was willing to entertain at that point. So thankfully, walking into that meeting, expecting to have a conversation about it and my oncologist to push quite heavily for it, to then have her turn around and say, look, it's honestly the best outcome we could have hoped for. Your cancer is gone. The next stage, and her idea was to go straight into a PET scan to look at whether there was any disease left. And had the PET scan come back with something, they would have then suggested or recommended radiotherapy and potentially a little bit more chemotherapy to try and get rid of the last few cancer cells. I have actually asked for it to be pushed back so I can use the metabolic and the complementary approaches that I have been to try and clear up those last cells without the potential of doing more damage to my body, to give me the best overall prognosis in life generally, because it does look as though I will be heading to be cured, to be no evidence of disease. And I should note on that point that with a stage 4 cancer, because you are classified as inoperable and incurable, I will never technically be classed as non-cancerous. I will never, on paper, according to the NHS, be classed as cured. I will always be classed as a terminal cancer patient, unfortunately. Even though my cancer has completely gone, I've had no surgery, nothing else, they will still always class me as dying, which is entertaining.
It's incredible, isn't it? But just such incredible news, Dale. And, you know, after such, you know, for the want of word, a better word of the journey, but I mean, just such a journey you've been through. And I mean, you know, in and of itself, just your cancer journey and what you've had to do to advocate for yourself, but alongside your wife, you know, 2 small children, your mum passing. I mean, it's just, you couldn't make it up, could you? The journey that you've had.
No. And that for me is part of the reason. So I realized quite early on that bar people like Jane and Amanda, there aren't really any voices in this community who, first of all, cut through all the, excuse my language, but bullshit.
Yeah.
Second of all, are properly evidence-based.
Yeah.
and use science alone to define their path. There's a lot of people who use anecdotal evidence and use speculation. So they use things like soursop, etc., which have actually no real evidence behind them. Yeah, they're great for general health, and I don't, disagree with using them in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But my approach has very much been to use the actual evidence and use science and to try and essentially rate the papers I'm reading as to whether they're a phase 3 trial being the gold standard, a phase 2 trial, a phase 1 trial, or whether they are just anecdotal evidence, etc., or singular studies in isolation that don't necessarily map my profile. I have tried to use that in order to then provide other people with not a roadmap, because I think there is no one single protocol. There is no single way to treat an individual cancer. There is no one follow this route and you will cure yourself. Somebody, as I pointed out with Roger, somebody who follows the exact same route as me with the exact same cancer as me could have a very different outcome just purely based on their genetics.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to do now is to use that science. And I've accidentally become an influencer of some kind, not that I like that phraseology, because I'm just trying to give people the breadcrumbs to go off and do their own research. And this started completely by accident. It wasn't ever intended. All I did was put up a post saying, look, I'm disappearing off of LinkedIn. I'm shutting off my commercial life and my business, and therefore I won't be active on here anymore. That post alone got over 1 million views and went massively viral. I had over 15,000 messages in the end. I
Wow.
keep telling people it was roughly 5, but I've realized recently it was over 15,000 messages from people. I'm still yet to go back to half of them, and I apologize profusely to anybody who sent me a message at that point. I am trying to do
Everyone
roughly,
understands you were busy.
well, I'm now trying to reply to between 5 to 10 a day, and I've still got over 10,000 I have to reply to.
Wow.
It's going to take me a very long time to get back to everybody, but it's taken me an hour to 2 hours every single day as it is. I haven't got much more capacity than that because I do between 6 and 8 hours of different therapies every single day, from hyperbaric chamber therapy to cold water therapy. Now I'm back on it after the neuropathy from my chemotherapy has dropped a bit, to saunas, to yoga, to Wim Hof breathing, to all these things I do. I don't have the time to go back to everybody, so I apologize to anybody listening to this who heard that. And then the secondary piece is myself and Jane McClelland are also in the process now of starting a charity. We've realized that both of us have a very similar mindset. Both of us are looking at the evidence and ways to just help people as much as we can and to provide as much of a roadmap from, Jane had stage 4 cancer twice now, I think, and has managed to get herself through it into a manageable state where she is able to live and her prognosis is no longer live, sort of thing. And myself, who's managed to hopefully get rid of my cancer completely. We have come across enough people on this journey and enough proof on this journey that this works, that complementary therapies, when well evidenced and well backed and well researched, do hugely improve survival rates. That's not to say, unfortunately, that everybody will be in the same position as me or as Jane, but you can improve your quality of life, your quantity of life. You can improve your overall health and put yourself in the best possible position for a chance at survival by following this route as early on in your diagnosis as you can. And we are now looking to start a charity called Beyond the Standard in order to, first of all, provide resources and evidence and education around that to everyone from patients through to oncologists themselves. And second of all, to try and then, over the longer term, to fund some of the trials that the pharmaceutical companies, etc., can't or don't want to pay for the off-label drugs, in order to give things like the NICE and the UK medical regulators enough evidence to start implementing some of these, off-label drugs, approaches, and complementary therapies.
Yeah, incredible.
Aside that, I've also started a petition, as we mentioned earlier. And my petition was actually started before the idea of the charity. And the petition was based on a piece that Robin from Yes to Life, exactly, Robin wrote around personal integrative budgets. And I thought it was such a good idea that I sort of took that, I've morphed it a little bit and turned it into, twinned it with my story and morphed it slightly. And we launched a petition to try and look at the use of personal integrative budgets. And just for note, these are already in place in places like Switzerland and in Germany. They use this exact approach. They use everything from mistletoe therapy through to hyperbaric therapy as part of oncological treatment. And they have an availability to use a personal integrative health budget in order to fund some of those complementary therapies to allow people to increase their own chances of survival and to create their own path so that they are part of their own healing journey, as that sort of mentality can really help in cancer treatment in general, as does having a purpose like I now have with the charity and with my advocacy work. That helps as well. But that petition is aimed specifically at trying to change the focus of the NHS and trying to change the political focus from not just the cost of treatment, but to overall survival rate and therefore the longer term cost to society and the NHS by using complementary therapies. And the budget we're asking for is not exactly huge. You know, you're talking about a few £1,000s versus one round of chemo, which costs 3 or 4 times that.
Yeah.
But the implementation of that could mean hugely increased and improved survival rates across the board. So that could mean, you know, a budget for somebody to come and use someone like yourself on the sort of nutritional and integrative health side. It could mean a budget to use for mistletoe therapy, which is actually phase 3 trial approved and used in multiple European and worldwide countries already for the increase of immune function. It could mean the use of some off-label drugs like metformin, etc. It could mean hyperbaric therapy. It could mean access to infrared sauna. It could mean a myriad of things. But allowing people to actually have that decision themselves and to have that budget to do it themselves, the mental change that that alone will have and the power that that will give people to look just beyond the standard of care is huge. And that alone, that enhancement of people's personal responsibility should hopefully translate directly into better overall survival rates for all of us.
It's a win-win, isn't it? I mean, it's just an absolute win-win.
Yeah, and I mean, for those like Liz Reid and these oncologists who are against that, I mean, in all reality, what harm is something like that as long as they are evidence-backed, science-based therapies, ones that are phase 3 trial approved, that are proven, like mistletoe, like exercise even. You know, if we paid for people to have a personal trainer once a week out of that budget, the overall survival rates would be hugely increased. And I'm not asking for them to go and okay the use of ivermectin, fenbenders, or methylene blue, or all these crazy things overnight at all. What we're asking for is the use of science-backed, evidence-based, phase 3 trial approved therapies and nutritional approaches. So cut out carbs, cut out glucose. The effect that that will have alone with a little bit of exercise added on top will increase survival rates by, I think the output of the trial you were referring to on exercise was it'll increase overall prognosis by 36% and above. Twin that with a bit of nutrition, you're talking about an exponentially larger amount of survival and therefore
quality of life, because people feel better and they feel more empowered and they are sleeping better and they feel less exhausted, and you know the knock-on effect it has then to their families and to the people that they love and care about and around them and supporting them. I mean, it's just absolutely endless.
And the wider trickle-down effect of that on general society and their ability to provide in society as well. So I've gone from being a complete drain on society. I ended up having to claim benefits because I'd been hugely unwell. My partner went through her own lung cancer surgery. We weren't able to work. We have 2 toddlers to support, and we had no income because I'd quit my life in order to go and start my own business. We were a drain on society, and well, we still are at the moment for the time being. But my approach has managed to put me in a position where I am going to become a functional member of society again. And we're now in the position where we are going to, first of all, I'm going to launch a blog in the coming couple of months. We're actually off to Mexico to celebrate my prognosis passing for the whole of September to go and see my partner's family because she's Mexican. Her brother hasn't yet met our youngest, so we're going to go out to see the whole family, spend a month chilling on the beach and just enjoying life and seeing my prognosis pass with a beer in my hand, probably, although I shouldn't.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
I've lost my point, but the wider point of that was the knock-on effect then is that I am now able to contribute to society again. We are starting this blog in order to, first of all, try and provide health tips that we've come across along our journey, to provide tidbits for people to begin their own research and pointers for everything from the medical papers to the scientific backing to looking at which supplements, etc., are in the purest form and don't contain fillers and binders that you need to avoid, how to combine some of these, the things that I can do outside of a medical setting where someone like Harry would need to step in for the use of off-label drugs and prescriptions. We are looking to provide a blog that gives the general health side to that, very similar to sort of the advice that yourself would provide, but doing it on a much more general scale, and just from our personal experience. And then we're also looking, because Anna very kindly went and retrained as a phlebotomist and cannulation expert early on in my journey.
I mean, how incredible is this woman?
She's a superhero. Like, honestly, she's done 99% of the caring for the kids whilst recovering from her own cancer surgery, whilst looking after me through my emotional ups and downs with my mother dying and diagnosis, and giving me the space to do everything. And then she went on top of this and retrained as a phlebotomist and cannulation expert, purely so that we could do vitamin C infusions from home, because we realized that the cost of a vitamin C infusion at a clinic, we were quoted £14,000 for 1 month's worth of IV therapy. And the IVs that they would give me, they would not sign off more than 25 grams. And because I'm 6'3" and I was, 120 plus kilos, I'm a former semi-professional rugby player and all this kind of stuff. I'm a big bloke. I needed nearer to 80 to 100 grams. By the way, just as an FYI, if you're going to go the vitamin C route, don't do it for yourself just generally. Go and get a G6PD test done. Otherwise, it could mess with your genetics and it could be really, really dangerous. Make sure you have the proper testing done and understand what you're doing first. But we then got Anna to do my cannulas. We then bought the vitamin C from a place online that we found ourselves. We then validated it, obviously, through Harry and Amanda, etc. And we implemented a lot of this ourselves at home. So that then led to the idea that, first of all, the only clinic we could find was about 2 and a bit hours away. Second of all, they wouldn't sign off on things for an oncological setting. So I couldn't have, early on, I wanted to do glutathione because I thought adding in antioxidants would help. This was before I sort of understood the true mechanisms at play. I also wanted to add in more vitamin B12 because I thought, being a vegetarian, I needed to. That probably, in hindsight, wouldn't have been a good idea, and all these kind of things. But at that point in time, they weren't willing to sign off on anything at all, purely because of the mention of cancer. And they wouldn't give me a therapeutic dose because vitamin C acts at different levels of vitamin C act in different processes and pathways. So low level, it acts as an antioxidant, which is a good thing for general health. But at a high level, it creates an oxidative effect within the tumor itself, because the tumor gets confused with the glucose and the vitamin C at those high levels. And if you are starving your body by the metabolic routes already, it then allows the tumor to confuse itself and use the vitamin C and essentially gum itself up with the vitamin C, and that then creates reactive oxygen species, or ROS, inside of the tumor itself, which then help with both the apoptosis and the ferroptosis processes. They wouldn't allow me to do it at the levels that would actually induce that. They would only give me, the lower level antioxidant route. So we managed to go from looking at spending 14 grand per month, and I did 3 of these cycles, so it's a lot of money in the end, 42,000 pounds it would have been, to buying it ourselves. Anna, and we also have a nurse who's a friend of ours who came and oversaw her cannulas, specifically just the cannulas. And we then were able to give it at home for less than £1,000 per cycle. So we're saving of roughly, what was it, £39,000.
A life-changing difference.
Yeah, and that sort of is one of the purposes of the clinic that we're looking to set up, is to firstly make some of these available. And secondly, although the main aim of the clinic is going to be commercial, because first of all, we have to earn some money to survive. And well, that's just business and that's how it works. But there is also going to be, once we start making profit, we will be sidelining 10% of the profits into a foundation and looking to try and provide high dose vitamin C, or high therapeutic dose vitamin C, with doctor oversight and guidance in specific oncological settings, and for other chronic illnesses over the longer term as well, for free to cancer patients if we can.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. I mean, there's so much that can be done, and you've been an absolute shining light in kind of already. I mean, your LinkedIn sort of messages and sort of the depth of kind of you share, both from a personal level, but practically from what you're doing. I mean, it just gives so much information, so much hope. And so I think seeing that navigate into more information, more targeted information, and ultimately into sort of clinic and provision is absolutely incredible, Dale.
Thank you. I mean, what else can you do? I can't return back to my day job, so we have to find another way to survive, and we have to find a way, because this has given me a huge amount of purpose in life,
Yeah.
realizing that there isn't the information out there, that there isn't the starting points, that there is so much out there that it is hugely overwhelming.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think to do at this point, first of all, to help other people in my position, and second of all, to be of a benefit to society, and I suppose third of all, to now reequate to where my mental state is and the amount of research I've done and what I feel needs to come across to people and to advocate for that, is to do this route, is to try and be part of that wider conversation, to try and actually provide these services in a way that people can access and that can actually make a longer term difference.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're already making an incredible difference. You've already made an incredible difference to your own diagnosis and story and of that of your family, but you're making a massive difference already to the people around, and I know within the cancer community as well. So thank you and well done for everything you're doing. And just to pick up on the Integrative Cancer Care petition, so we will link that, and we do sort of advocate massively that anyone who has the ability or hasn't already signed that petition does sign that petition. So everything you've heard Dale talk about, this petition is really about flying the flag for that integrative cancer care and that personalised and prescriptive support and choice for anyone living with and beyond cancer. So it's critical that we all familiarise ourselves with it and that we all sign it. So we'll make sure that we keep flying the flag for that as well, because it's such incredibly important work you're doing. And I'm glad you've got this depth of sense of purpose from it, and that you're driving it, but what an absolute difference it sort of makes. I'm going to ask you to kind of wrap up, Dale, for me with a couple of kind of sort of quick fire questions. With everything you've gone through in this last year particularly, what's kind of one of the, because you've said so much of your time between responding to people, being in complementary, treatments for yourself and obviously, supporting the family and driving this mammoth kind of mission. What's one of the kind of rituals you do on a daily basis now that's just become sacred to you, that's just become really key for you?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I think one of my favorites at this point in time is Wim Hof breathing. So
Okay.
every single morning, I set aside 15 minutes and I sit there within sort of 10, 15 minutes of getting up. I have a glass of water and then I sit and do 15 minutes of Wim Hof breathing. And it puts me both in the mental state and in the physical best state to then approach my day. It increases my oxygen levels. It makes me generally feel great. And at this point, I don't think I would be in the position I am probably without that Wim Hof breathing.
Amazing, amazing. And yeah, it's such an important sort of message, isn't it, anyway, to sort of, one, give ourselves that time, but that foundation to start our day in that way, but the importance of kind of breathing well and sort of consciously for our overall health, physically and emotionally. And, over this journey, I mean, you've been into some of the darkest places I can't even imagine. What's the kind of joy you've rediscovered? Obviously your purpose in this kind of work and mission is palpable, but what's this experience reignited in you? What's something you've reconnected with as a result of going through this experience?
Well, I suppose it's probably very cliched, and I think you've heard it from a million and one cancer patients, but it's just the simple things in life. So I went from working 14, 16, 18-hour days, 6 days a week on my own business and for other people, to realizing that the most precious thing for me was time with my children, to see my little boy build a tower and then the smile on his face and the daddy, 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 look at this. Before I probably would have looked up from my computer, gone, oh, that's amazing, look back down and just kept going. Now I try to actually take the physical time to go over, to look at it with him and to reflect his level of enthusiasm in it and to see the difference in my children because of that time and because of that, that presence is huge. And for me, that is the biggest thing I will take from this is it doesn't matter anything before this. It doesn't matter how hard you worked. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what the color of your skin is. None of it matters. What matters is the physical time you put into not just your own children, but into people, the presence you have, and that actual want to spend time with them translates through everything. It translates through to how socially secure you feel, to how people see you, to how people treat you, to how people talk to you. Having put that into my oncologist, having put that into everybody I've come along this journey with, I have seen the change of me and therefore the reflection that they then give me, and how different that is based on the presence I have in that room.
Yeah.
Back when I was first diagnosed, I was, sidetracked by thinking about death. I was sidetracked about thinking about what might come next, by the scanxiety, by my mother's death, by these million and one things that were going on in my life, that I wasn't able to sit there and be fully present in my oncological meetings. I wasn't able to push back and self-advocate in the way I now know I needed to. And I wasn't able to translate the thoughts I had into a sort of cohesive way that my oncologist would then be able to look at it from a position of interest and intrigue in order to understand what I was trying to do. Having changed the way I look at and I reflect myself into people, and having changed that element of presence and how I now see and view the world, the change is just phenomenal, and it makes me feel happy, and it makes me feel, even simple interactions with people make you feel revitalized rather than drained. And that for me is the biggest takeaway and the biggest positive to all of this.
Amazing. Well, that's beautiful. And yeah, I mean, nothing else needs to be said for that. What a powerful statement that is in and of itself. You've created a community, and I know, you get so much engagement. I mean, you talked about the thousands and thousands of unreplied messages, which, as I say, I'm sure everyone who's wrote them releases you from the obligation of replying to in every way possible. But
I'm going to reply to all of them, by the way. It might take me another year or two, but I absolutely will reply to all of them.
I have no doubt. I can see the determination. But with that community, I mean, you must have heard, you've said you've had people reach out, you must have heard stories, and you must have had people sort of sharing their own experiences and also just encouraging you along the way. What's one of the kind of most unexpected messages you've had from within that community since you've been telling the story and sharing your insights and knowledge?
So I'll give you two. One is it's a particularly negative one, unfortunately, and the other one is a positive one.
Okay.
So the first one, I actually had a phone call out of the blue a little while ago, not too long after Christmas, just after, thankfully, I'd started seeing some progress in my approach to things. And it was from somebody who was purporting to be a very famous oncologist.
Okay.
I can't say whether it was them or not because it was from a blocked phone number. It did sound like them, I'll be honest. But I don't think it's fair of me to release the name or anything else. I put this in a LinkedIn post as well. They outright attacked me. They went straight to calling me names, calling me dangerous, calling me a silly little boy who's going to get myself killed. All of these sorts of things, and telling me that my approach would get other people killed, and really ramming it down my throat and leaving me with such a sense that, what if I am doing damage? What if this is the problem? What if I am part of the misinformation? How have I gotten this wrong? And it really put me in a dark place for a little while.
Yeah.
It took me a little while of, thankfully, having seen my approach working. I don't think if I had that, I don't think I would have kept going at that point. I think it knocked me so much, and it took me a long time to then talk about and put it into words enough to even put it in a LinkedIn post, because I hold a lot of things that I put in my LinkedIn posts until I've physically and mentally dealt with them, because it's not worth releasing them until I have, because otherwise they can hurt me too much. But it took me a long time to get to that point. It took me a long time to get past the fact that their mentality and my mentality were coming from very different places, that their potentially misguided approach to, first of all, the wider integrative and complementary space was born from a place of possibly fear, and a place from a long history of learned knowledge that this was going against, and therefore it was a reaction from them as opposed to an evidence-based conversation, as it were, because it wasn't a conversation in any way, shape or form. And I think the takeaway from that one is that you shouldn't believe anybody who you don't trust.
Yeah.
I have built a trusted team, and I will only now listen to that trusted team. I get suggestions from people on a daily basis. I get called all sorts. I've had hundreds of messages calling me all sorts of names under the sun. I thankfully am in a mental position where I can brush it all off, and I've got a very thick skin. And I now only listen to the people who I have brought into my trusted circle because I have brought them in for very good reason, and they have now proven themselves to be the people that I need. And therefore, anybody else outside of that is not worth listening to. And I'm going to encourage other people to do the same. Spend the time to build your team, spend the time to understand who you're interacting with, spend the time to really trust them and to spend enough time with them to get where they're coming from, why they're coming from that direction. And I would also say that you need to try and pick your team very, very with a lot of passion and with a lot of understanding that they are for you, not because they worked for somebody else. So following the route of any one naturopath, following the route of any one integrative oncologist, just because somebody else has had results isn't the way to success. It's finding the person who works for you and who you understand and who puts things in ways that you can see the benefit of and puts things in ways that you can understand simply and interact with, as opposed to somebody who just sits there and throws science in your face all the time. Find the person, find the people, find the team who work for you. The other message I got, which was on a positive note, was I actually had somebody reach out to me a little while ago and say that they had kind of given up on their own health journey, that coming across my messages, which was purely by chance, they were Googling something completely different and they randomly came across my LinkedIn. It had given them the confidence and it had given them the ability to start their own research. They actually came from a very, very similar background to mine. They had a very similar skill set. They had been a global director for various different companies. They were extremely wealthy in their own right. They were all these things that should have meant that they had every possibility and chance at success and survival. But they had felt basically browbeaten by their oncologist. They had felt that there was no other choice, that it was too dangerous to try and look at these other things, and they hadn't given themselves the confidence or the hope to do so. They had since discovered my LinkedIn, and they had spent sort of 2 or 3 months following it before they even came to the point of actually reaching out to me. And in that time, they had then seen, and they'd done their own research and created their own protocol, and they had then seen a lot of progress in their own cancer, where they'd been told it was completely inoperable and curable. They were going to be dead in, I think theirs was 5 to 8 months. They had then seen a regression of their disease, and they were starting to see sort of the impact of what they were doing, and it had given them the confidence and the thirst for life again as well. And hearing that from somebody who was going through something even worse than my own position, hearing that I had inspired and given confidence when I was never intending to in any way, shape or form. I was just sharing my story because it was cathartic for me and because I felt that there wasn't information out there, and just in case it might help somebody. To hear that it actually had such a huge and profound impact on me that I'm not too ashamed to admit, I sat down and I actually cried after that. I'm not one to cry. I have not cried anywhere along this journey, except for when I had to hand my dog back because we couldn't look after him at that point. That's the only other thing that's made me cry along this journey. Even my mother's death, I didn't cry in the end. I don't think I probably emotionally dealt with all of it, but I didn't end up crying over my mother's death. I cried over this person's message of me giving them hope, and the fact that everything I had shared had given them confidence to do their own research and to find their own path. And because of that, they now actually had a chance to spend time with their children and have an actual potential chance at some longer term survival.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Amazing, beautiful. And I'm glad you hear messages like that, because I think the difference you're making is absolutely incredible. And I think you won't even realize the depth of the iceberg of what of the difference you're making. And as you say, I know this hasn't come through choice. This wasn't a deliberate path you've kind of opted to take, but I think your story is incredible, and your tenacity and your drive, as we said at the beginning. It's unfortunate in one way that you've had to advocate so hard for yourself and still continue to, but I think that it feels like we're on the cusp of real change, and I know you'll be a massive part in sort of leading that and flying that flag, as the likes of the brilliant Robin Daly and Jane McClelland and Amanda King and Nasha Winters, as you mentioned, and Patricia Peat and people like that. Just incredible individuals who are doing amazing things to make sure that cancer doesn't have to be the death sentence. A lot of people think it is, and there is always hope. And that no matter what the prognosis, there are things that we can do for ourselves individually to support ourselves, whether it's through our emotional well-being or our physical well-being. And you've definitely been an incredible shining light in that, Dale. So I wish you all the health and happiness for the future. And I hope you get an opportunity this next month to just truly kick back and love being away, drinking that beer on the beach, enjoying Anna and the children, and get to just enjoy being present and living your life.
I've got some LinkedIn messages and comments to go back to before then, but yes, next month is going to be spent just living life. I'm not going to be posting on LinkedIn for the whole of September, I think. I'm just going to go and take time with my family to enjoy the success that we've now had.
Incredible. Well, it's been very well deserved. And thank you so much for giving me so much of your time and sharing your story. And as we mentioned, everybody listening, please do make sure you jump over and sign the petition. And if you're not already following Dale, we'll make sure that all of the links to Dale's LinkedIn, his website, all the social handles, etc., are here in this messaging. So you can kind of jump on over and follow him, because it is definitely something you need to do. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me.
Well, what an extraordinary conversation with Dale, and what an extraordinary man. His grit, determination and drive in the face of what was absolutely disabling news, and a system that offered no real hope, are nothing short of remarkable. Through the darkest times, Dale has risen like a phoenix, igniting courage and hope, not just for those living with cancer, but for anyone navigating life's greatest challenges. You can connect with Dale and follow his story and his incredible writing on LinkedIn, where you'll find him at Dale J. Atkinson, and we'll pop the links below. You can also please sign the petition Dale mentioned at change.org/integrative cancer care. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Ancient Wisdom, Modern Science. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Until next time, be well.